Hi, I'm Charlie Mato-Toyela with Blue Bear Flutes, and of course our website, bluebearflutes.com, where you'll find some of the greatest handmade Native American flutes available anywhere. And today's video is just a real quick tip video for flute makers because oftentimes we get people asking us the length and the spacing and the distance of this, that, and the other. And the only spacings that really matter in sizes are the sound hole and these fingerings, and really far from it is from the bottom matters, but that's something that's usually tuned on an individual basis. So what I'm going to show you today is a few other lengths that we get questions about, or people have been asking me about forever and a day. And the reason I haven't spent a lot of time on these other lengths is because they're really kind of irrelevant. And I will show you why and tell you a little bit about what it is that people really believe is going on there, because I've heard it from other people, and then I'll tell you how it really does or doesn't affect anything. So before I go any further, the one thing that all YouTubers beg for is likes and subscribes, which you're probably already subscribed anyway. But if you get a chance to hit the like button, it may or may not do anything. I do appreciate interactions with us, though, and would certainly love to hear any other questions you have in the comments. So for the longest time, the videos that we have made have been based a lot of times on questions that people have asked. And so that's why we always like to see positive, very good questions in the comments. If you can't think of a good one, think of a silly one, but make sure it's a good silly one. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get started here. So the first thing people ask me is about the distance from the mouthpiece to the sound hole, or to the air supply hole, which is under this block, and I'm going to show you in just a second. This area in here is something that a lot of people call the slow air chamber. You'll see it if you join any forums or anywhere that people are discussing Native American flutes. They'll always call it the SAC, which is a very mathematically eloquent way of saying the slow air chamber, which is supposed to mean that when you blow in here, the air pressure slows down over here. And I'm sorry, I'm a good friend of Bernoulli, even though he's been passed on now for about 100 years. But there's a lot that is misunderstood about the speed of the air and how that affects the flute. And let's just not even pretend that exists, okay? Or rather, let's pretend that that doesn't even exist, maybe, any which way. The size of your air chamber here doesn't really matter. There's numerous flutes that have been made without these. I personally like to have one because it affects the flute differently, like to a fine degree moisture control, but really doesn't really do a lot for moisture control. In another way of thinking, it gives the flute a little bit of elasticity to the attack. Still, you can still do that with your mouth. I mean, a lot of this kind of thing is presumptions that really aren't backed up by a whole lot of anything, and certainly there are a lot of people out there. They're again on Native American flute forums, which I've never been to on my entire life. But there's a lot of people like that theorize that this does this, that, and the other. Anyway, I can tell you from having seen countless flutes made without an air chamber down there that it just really doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the tone of the flute, the sound of the flute. It doesn't affect the moisture inside of the flute and how the flute plays and what have you. It is something, its purpose, and I'll tell you what its purpose really was there again, going back historically. This particular design of Native American flute, I believe, is based on clay flutes. And with the clay flute, there is a mouthpiece that's made all in one piece. And eventually I'll get into making some clay flute videos. We have one, I think, right now, way, way long ago. But eventually I'll get to doing that. I've made a lot of clay flutes, an unfathomable amount of them. But with the clay flutes, you have to slide a piece up in there, and that creates the air path and the way that the channel directs the flute's air and what have you. So taking that out of the equation, if you had to make this with a piece of wood and you didn't have, I won't say luxury, but the responsibility maybe of pushing that piece of material up in there to create your air path, using a piece of wood, you have certain constraints you have to work around. One of the constraints when you're using hand tools, and we're talking historically, 500, 600, 800, 2,000 years ago. Historically, the flutes were made from hollow materials like river cane and what have you. And it just, this is something that evolved. It just happened. It's kind of a part that you have to have if you're going to get air across that hole. You know, you can sit and think about that for a little while and kind of meditate on it, and I'm sure you'll come to the same conclusion that I have, that that's really how and why this chamber here up in this area exists. In the past, I was one of those people who theorized that it was supposed to do this, that, or the other, but it's just something that kind of bloomed out of its own need. Now, I've got other videos showing how to tie string back on your flute or leather on your flute. I've got videos to show you how to place this flute block and how to do this, that, and the other. This is one of our Google flutes. I should have played it for you first because it sounds really good. But anyway, it's made out of pine, and it's got a standard flute block on it. Underneath the standard flute block here, it's got a knot. This is my own personal one, and I left that knot there. I wouldn't have probably sent a customer's flute out with a block with a knot in it, but I did a lot of work to make sure that this one stayed here. I have my own personal reasons why I did that. I just like this one. Anyway, another question I get about lengths and distances and size and, you know, all this kind of thing is, how far should the air supply hole here be from the sound hole? And I've had people tell me, old people in the past that have told me that if you have a short channel, that the distance between this and that are short, then it will make your flute respond quickly, which is not true. The response time of your flute is so infinitesimal. The variance in that is not enough that you can really even measure it. So that's still kind of a fantasy there. But there again, I can make a track that is burned, which will allow air to travel across it quicker than one that is not burned. And you can kind of think there that my track could be this long, and if you haven't burned your track, then it could be this long, and because of the frictional surface, it's still going to have the same amount of airspace. I mean, it's just really, we're talking about microcosms here. There are things that are important. I've had so many other videos about that, especially this edge. How sharp this edge is, which is the reason that a lot of the flute makers out there that use those brass pieces up here ever did that. The sharpness of the edge makes a big difference. And it needs to be the same. It needs to mirror the shape and everything of the sound hole. And then in other words, the width of the track should be the width of the sound hole. Back here on the air supply hole, you have some variations you can do in there. You can make it bigger, which will give you the ability to put more air through, but really the air amount that you're going to be able to put through is going to be determined by the depth of this track and how wide it is. That's a measurement that in liquid or in not viscosity, in quality, how much is in something anyway. This is a measurement of volume, not sound volume, like how loud something is. But anyway, there's a volume of air that can pass in this air chamber here, and that is going to determine how really the potential of the loudness of the flute is. So you've got to remember that the volume means a lot of different things. It doesn't just mean how loud something is, but how much air can be contained inside of this flute is an amount of something. An amount of a fluid, air, inside of this is also called its volume. So the volume of the air that can travel across this track, there is like a terminal velocity there that you can reach. You can only go so far depending on the depth and width of the track there. So that is really critical, more so than how long it is and how short it is. But one other thing that's critical, like I say, is that it has to be incredibly smooth. And open wood pores, regardless of how fine they're sanded, will always have drag and friction on them. So the way that you cut down on friction is either seal it with something, some chemical, which you can use, or burn it. And I like burning it a lot better because it's a more natural thing to do. Plus, there are countless things that happen when you burn it versus putting chemicals on it, which don't really affect it as positively. But long story short, the distance from here to there really doesn't matter. And in respect of that, the only way that it does have any kind of matter is the difference between, and you'll forgive my analogy here, I don't mean anything by it, but the difference between a pistol and a shotgun. A shotgun has a longer barrel, which means that its projectile coming out of it will go down a long path before it comes out the end and will tend to want to stay on that course. Whereas a pistol, which is a short range weapon, when you pull the trigger on it, it has a short barrel, regardless of how lengthy the barrel is. I mean, you have long barrel pistols and short barrel pistols, but regardless of the length of the barrel, as long as it's a pistol, unless the barrel's as long as a shotgun or a rifle, typically the projectile coming out of a pistol will not stay accurate for a long distance. And the only time that it can stay accurate for a long distance is if you have more force behind it, which means it's going to have a lot more kick. And still there's, once again, microcosms we're dealing with there. When it starts being affected by wind friction and by numerous things like there in rifling, and the actual length of the barrel may have a little bit of play involved. There's really, apples and oranges compared to pistols and rifles or shotguns. So likewise, a longer track area gives you the ability to have a more fine-tuned and precise blast of air, whereas the short track area really is going to depend on how much air you can cram down that track to make the flute louder, or to make the flute this way. And too many people study that and drift outside of what historically was accurate and what really matters. And really what it boils down to in the end is, does the flute sound good or does it not sound good? And a lot of people think that they have designed a flute that sounds good by inlaying some kind of water-resistant plastic inside of it. And some people think that they've made a flute that sounds good by taking it down some rabbit hole that really is not the direction that a flute, or especially a Native American flute, needs to go. It just boils down to, you need to play the thing. Quoting Bobby Johns, an old chief, Creek Indian chief friend of mine, that he used to tell me, Charlie, just play the flute. And likewise, that's all that really matters. So I hope this video has found you well. I hope you've found some insight in it. If you're a flute player or just Native American flute enthusiast and you really didn't think you were going to be learning how to make a flute today, you just learned a minor little part of the game. And of course, we do have hundreds of videos on making Native American flutes and everything alike. So I hope this has found you well and given you a little bit of insight into whether that does or does not matter. We have made here at Blue Bear Flutes, at this particular point in history, a little over 2.5, 3 million flutes, and I don't know if I could say otherwise about that track area and the distance between the two things. A lot of people say that I left that information out of my book. The reason I left it out of the book, because there again, it's immaterial. It's not really, I didn't leave out, I didn't tell you the wall thickness of a flute either. And that's because there again, it's to some minor degree, I do speak about it in one of the chapters about resonant materials, but it's so immaterial. I mean, I just really, unless you have something that looks ridiculous with a really tiny hole inside of it, it just doesn't feel right or make sense. And what feels right and makes sense is what you need to focus on. So anyway, y'all take care. Charlie Mato-Toyela for Blue Bear Flutes, bluebearflutes.com. Don't forget to check out our Instagram, also Blue Bear Flutes. We hope to see you here again very soon. Take care and have a good one.